very simple but important thing about Matthew's gospel, and that's this. Matthew did not record the teachings of Jesus in a way that contains or includes a historical or chronological type of record of when or why Jesus spoke the individual sayings that are presented. But rather, Matthew's unique purpose in writing his gospel was to present Jesus as the King. And as such, he presented Jesus' sayings lumped together by subject, giving no consideration at all for the teaching itself as though it were supposed to add up to any overall single doctrine or big picture. In other words, Matthew was never meant to be used the way these post-tribbers teachers are all using it. You cannot do that with Matthew. Do you know why we have 4 Gospels? Why not just one long Gospel that tells everything in one Gospel? Why give us 4, Because each of the 4 writers of the Gospels are recording a different and specific aspect of Jesus. Do you know what they are? Matthew wrote to show Jesus as King of Kings, as I just said. Mark didn't write to show Jesus as King of Kings. He wrote to show Jesus as the suffering servant Messiah and perfect sacrifice that takes away the sins of the world. Luke wrote to show Jesus as the perfect man. John wrote to show Jesus as the Son of God. Each of the 4 Gospels is associated with a different color and symbol that correspond to their purpose in writing. Matthew's color for the king, you know what color kings wear? Purple. Mark's color is red, signifying the shed blood of Jesus. Luke's color is white, showing the perfect man with no sin. And John's color is blue, showing the eternal nature of Jesus. They each have a symbol as well, the 4 faces of the cherubim. Matthew's symbol is the lion, the symbol of the king. Mark's is the bull or the ox, the symbol of the sacrifice. Luke, the perfect man, so his symbol is the man. John is the eagle, the eternal one, who became flesh and dwelt among us. And that's also why each of these Gospels, the 3 that give us, or I guess 3, that give us a lineage, they trace Jesus' lineage slightly differently. Matthew shows Jesus' lineage being traced back to King David because he's showing Jesus as the rightful heir to the throne of David the king. Luke, the perfect man, traces Jesus' lineage all the way back to Adam, showing that Jesus is the perfect man. John doesn't give an actual lineage at all, the way we think of, because it was covered in the other 2, but he shows Jesus as the eternal Word, having no beginning. John 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made." So why does all this matter for our discussion? You must put all 4 of these Gospels together in order to get a complete picture of Jesus and what he is doing and what he's teaching and what he's all about. So the Gospel that shows Jesus as the King, Matthew, did not interest himself in writing down the sayings that Jesus taught in any kind of chronological order or give specific doctrinal understanding based on the context in which the topics are presented, but rather, Matthew did what you do for kings. He wrote the sayings of Jesus lumped together by subject, not at all regarding the initial context or doctrinal meanings of the teaching that may have been being presented at the time Jesus was actually saying these things. For that information, you must go to Luke's Gospel, where he is presenting the perfect man, and Luke tells us that he is presenting the information in the order that it actually happened. Matthew doesn't say he did that, because he didn't. He lumped together the sayings of Jesus, the King, by topic, not regarding why or when he actually said what he said. And yet people try to use Matthew to establish doctrines, including timings of last days events, based on the lumped together sayings of Jesus as found in Matthew's Gospel, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. You can't do that with Matthew. When I was a kid, my dad gave us a LP record, okay? It shows how old I am. He bought us records of everything, all the time. And one of the records I remember having, that my dad got us, was great moments in presidential speeches. And you put the needle down, and you'll hear something like John F. Kennedy going, "Therefore, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And then it'll go right into something else he said. And it'll go right into something else he said, or whatever. And then it'll go into other great presidents and their great speeches. But it lumped together their sayings by subject that wouldn't tell you anywhere in the record, unless it was somewhere in the liner notes or something, as what made him say that. Or what was he really talking about at the time. And if you try to use that to come up with some kind of meaning other than what somebody historically who knows the man or knows what he was really saying, or put it in the right context in which he was really talking, you can come up with anything. I've seen videos on YouTube where somebody who really is an expert editor put together the entire Sugar Hill Gang Rapper's Delight thing. You remember that? One of the very first, if not the first, rap tune ever invented. And it's got a lot of words, and they've taken like some news guy, you know, Tom Brokaw or somebody, and had everything that guy ever said edited together from all the different times that this guy's been on TV telling the news, and they just took snippets of his words and put it together so it sounds like he's saying the Rapper's Delight. It's really entertaining. It's really amazing. But that's an extreme example of what Matthew has done with Jesus' sayings. He simply took things that Jesus said, and I'm going to prove this, things that Jesus said by topic, and said, oh, here's one thing Jesus said, here's something else Jesus said, here's something else Jesus said, and they became the verses in Matthew 24. That's just because that's where Jesus was talking about anything he said about last days things. It's all in Matthew 24, lumped together by subject. You can't say, well, this comes first and this comes next, because Jesus might not have said it in that order. In fact, I could show you that he didn't, because to go to the order, you got to go to Luke. So once you understand this about Matthew, it becomes easy to avoid the pitfalls that these other people have fallen into of trying to establish a timeline of last days events based on what they think they see in Matthew. You simply cannot use Matthew this way. Now, when you understand this, and you read, for example, Matthew 24, and we're going to look at this, where everything Jesus might have said on the subject of last days things is lumped together into one place, but not in any kind of chronological order of when he was actually teaching the subjects, you see the major difference between what he says in Matthew versus what he says in Luke's account of the same words. It's easy for me to make this claim about Matthew, but let's prove it with a clear example or two. So I'm going to show you, let's look at Matthew 24, starting at verse 26, where it says, wherefore, if they say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth, behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, I can believe that verse 26 and verse 27 go together. That sounds like he's still saying, he's finishing his point. But how does verse 28 fit into what he's talking about here? For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Excuse me? That doesn't sound like what he was just talking about. And then we get to our verse in question. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, verse 29, shall the sun be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. But I want to show you where Jesus actually said. Now, because one of the things that these guys always like to point out is they say, well, after means after. So they tell you that verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. And then verse 31, which comes after verse 29, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Well, if that comes after, then it has to be after the tribulation of those days, not before, right? Well, obviously, if that reasoning is going to hold up, then verse 28, for wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together, has to be something that comes after. Let's go skip down all the way to verses 40 and 41. I'm going to read verse 40 and 41. Then shall two be in the field. This is still Matthew 24. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. Verse 41. Two women shall be grinding at the mill. The one shall be taken and the other left. Okay. That's 40 and 41, so obviously if you know how to do numbers, that comes way after verse 28, does it not? But Matthew is lumping sayings of Jesus together, not giving any regard to when he actually said these things or what he was even talking about other than the general subject matter. But Luke, on the other hand, and we're not given one gospel without the others. You need all four of them. Watch what Luke says. For as much, this is Luke chapter 1, for as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, Verse 2, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses, and ministers of the word. Verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mayest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. Matthew doesn't say he wrote things in order, because he didn't. You don't do that for a king. You do that for a man. If Jesus was a man going about doing certain things, he was a man who was also God, because you need John to know that he was God. He was eternal. But as a perfect man, you're going to write about what things that he does in the order that he did them. Not in Matthew's case, because he's talking about a king, where you lump the things that he said as that's how you describe a king. Well, what did he say as a king? He said this, and you lump it all together by subject. See the difference? So if we want to know, when did Jesus say these words that Matthew records, and what was he talking about when he said them? We've got to go to Luke. So let's go to Luke chapter 17. I tell you, in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed. One shall be taken and the other shall be left. 2 women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken and the other left. 2 men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken and the other left. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? Where are they going to be taken? I mean, that's a normal question. And the they is the disciples. If you go back, Jesus is teaching them about last days things, and he's telling them there's going to be 2 people in a setting. One's going to be taken somewhere. The other one's going to be left. And he gives 3 examples. And the disciples naturally want to know, taken where? Where, Lord? Well, guess what he answers? Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. So, if we look at Luke, we find out that this is an answer to a question. The question was never put in Matthew. Why? Because if you're recording the words the king spoke, you're not going to record a bunch of just disciples. They're not the king. You're only recording what the king said, without regard to why he said it and what he was talking about. But he says this answer to their question is the result of him saying, 2 people are going to be doing this, one's taking the other's left. 2 people are going to be doing that, one's taking the other left. 2 people are going to be doing this, one's taking the other left. And they say, taken where, Lord? To wherever the body is. That's where the eagles are gathered together. So why does Matthew put the answer to this question as verse 28, when the question that they're going to ask isn't even discussed until verses 40 and 41? Well, after has to be after. Then shall 2 be in the field, one taking the other left. 2 women grinding at the mill, one taking the other left. No mention of the disciples saying, Where, Lord? And Jesus answering, oh, well, for that, we're going to go up and put it in verse 28? The answer to a question that was asked as a result of something that happens in Matthew at verses 40 and 41. So, if you're going to say that Matthew is all in order, you have to ask, well, did somebody open a window and the wind blew his notes all over the place and he put them together out of order? You can't use Matthew the way these people are using it. That's the point I want you to see. And that's the answer. You don't have to feel like the tribulation comes first and then the rapture after the tribulation of those days. Because guess what? Verse 29 could have been said anytime in Jesus' ministry. Immediately after. Did Jesus say this? Absolutely. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven can be shaken. That's absolutely going to happen. But guess what? He shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather his elect from the four winds of heaven, from one end of heaven to the other. That's also going to happen. But there's no way you can prove from Matthew that verse 31 happens after verse 29 in the course of events, the way they're going to play out. Because to do that, you'd also have to try and prove that wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together, happens way before verses 40 and 41, when the disciples hadn't even asked the question yet. So how can the answer come before the question that came as a result of verses 40? You see what I'm saying? Okay, I think if you can't get it from that, I don't know what to tell you. I have something else to say, though. For years, ever since I was a kid, I've grown up among Christians who believed that our rapture was going to be a sudden disappearing, and they used this passage, one taken and the other left. Lately, people have been waking up to the fact that this is not our rapture. And they're absolutely right. Jesus described